Hello, BookTube. We're down here in puppy territory to continue our library tour, this interminable library tour that I started on a lark in the middle of the year. And we have made our way all the way into the little book room here. You can see the step stool that I use to look at the taller bookcases. And I've been doing this. I did this yesterday, even though it was Saturday, and the video had an annoying amount of clicking sounds in it at the end, and so did another video I made yesterday. And the reason for that is technical. For the first time ever, I decided to invest in technology for this channel. I bought a tripod for like $2 online, and it came with a Bluetooth little remote control button, so that you're not reaching over to the camera. And it seemed like the easiest thing in the world to set up, to sync with my phone, and it did sync automatically, and it does work. But as usual, I can't get technology that's new to me to work perfectly well. So when I was trying to turn off the camera, it was just clicking but not turning off the camera. And now I realized that with the phone, right on top of me, I'm not doing anything special here, so that I don't really need a remote control for the phone. But the specs for the little remote control, the little Bluetooth remote control device, say online that it works perfectly well also with an iPad Air. And the control for the iPad Air, the button that you actually hit to hit record, doesn't seem to move around the screen when you shift the orientation of the screen. It seems to stay in one place only, which means you have to cover the camera to turn it on or off. You have to cover the camera with your thumb to turn it on or off. And I thought, okay, I don't really need it now that I think about it. Now I see what a pig's breakfast it is to use for the phone. I don't really need it for the phone, but it'd be a godsend for the iPad. Then I wouldn't have to reach across the camera. I could just turn it off remotely. And yet, even though the specs say that it will work, it does not. When I sync it up with the iPad, I am told I get a message that tells me it's too far away, even though it's right next to the device. So I'll keep working on that. I would actually like to film these videos on my iPad. It has a lot more storage. It has a much bigger, everything's just much bigger. It's just a much bigger version of this phone, except for the one key difference, which is that it doesn't play nice with Bluetooth. But I'll figure it out. If it can work, I'll figure it out. Not that it matters. None of you are coming here for technical expertise. I'm sure that you wouldn't mind if I reached in front of the camera to turn it on and off with the iPad every single day. But nevertheless, I care. But anyway, we're on to the next shelf here, and there's a bit of cocking. So those of you who are missing, I'm sure we're all missing Jason Harrigan while he's off on retreat, but he introduced us a word that is infinitely mockable and also infinitely usable, and that is cocking. And that is when you stack books laterally, both on top of themselves and on the tops of books that you have stacked vertically, or horizontally rather. And there's a bit of that here. I don't know of a book collection anywhere in the world that doesn't have cocking. So the first one is okay. The first one doesn't belong here. First one is by Christopher Huang. This is A Gentleman's Murder. It's a murder mystery novel from, I think, last year. Yeah, July of 2018. I had no idea, literally no idea what it's doing in here. It doesn't belong here. It probably doesn't belong in the broader collection either, but it certainly doesn't belong in here. So that's one of the benefits of this library tour, is that I'll get to see these books. The next one is another copy. We've already seen this. This is another copy of Kim Newman's great novel Anno Dracula, set in a world in which Dracula and his undead minions actually do make a fair bid for taking over 19th century England. Only they have a lot of competition. There are lots of other old bloodline vampires, strange creatures from the Orient, half vampires, humans who are made more or less immortal. It's a cast of thousands. I praised it not long ago, so I won't give it a lot of time now, but it is an absolute romp of a book. If you somehow missed it for Victober, which is its natural setting, you should still read it because it's fantastic. This next one is... This next one is another copy. I think we've already seen this as well. This is another copy of Wyman Richardson's great book, The House on Nauset Marsh. A great one, in my opinion, the greatest Cape Cod book of them all. It was done in installments, dispatches from the little farmhouse that Richardson owned on the Cape, and his glimpses into that world, into the world of what it was like to live in that house, to fish, to deal with the non-weatherized conditions, to deal with the various moods of the weather and the people on the Cape that is long gone. I love it. Absolutely love it. There are huge passages of it that I know from heart. Okay, the last of the Cocked books, something we saw, you heard me mention it just the other day. This is In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick. A lovely trade paperback. I've had this in many different editions, but I don't know what this is. This is, okay, Viking, the publisher, when they hit 75 years, they had an anniversary, and they reprinted a lot of books for their anniversary, some of their bestsellers. And that's when they reprinted this one. The original trade paperback, I don't think, looked like this. And I loved it. I loved the book. Even though I argued with it in some places, I still loved it. I think Philbrick's idea that the whale that stove in the whale ship Essex mistook the ship for a whale, it's a little bit much. It's exactly the kind of thing, the kind of statement that you get in animal writing, going back 400, 500 years, that you can easily just picture the animal in question getting up in court and saying, "Sir, I protest." But they can't do that, so you get to write anything you want about them. Let's see. Oh, all right. Well, here's another example. This is Alan Moorhead. A lot of you will know him for The White Nile and The Blue Nile. Fantastic writer who's largely fallen into desuetude. And this is his big book, Darwin and the Beagle. All about Charles Darwin and the voyage of the Beagle, in which Darwin tagged along as a naturalist and started to hatch out his ideas of how the world works, of how the natural world works. And Moorhead is great. He's a great guide to these sorts of things. Just fantastic. So, okay, great. This is an old, who did this? Touchstone. This is slightly older. I think this came out in the 1990s. This particular edition, 1997. But it's lovely. It's my favorite of all the versions that I've seen of this particular book. This is The Writing of Fiction by Edith Wharton. A little book. It's actually not about the writing of fiction. It's largely just literary reminiscences and whatnot. It belongs elsewhere. So now that I have it in my hand, I will plop it on that shelf for future consideration. It does not belong here. It belongs over with the books about books and writing. And what's the next one? Okay. Okay. This is not something even if you were. There's a mid-century author, Mary McCarthy. I'm a big fan of hers. I love her work. This is not a book you will be familiar with of hers, even if you are familiar with her work. This is something called Winter Visitors. It's a lovely little thing. It was never actually for sale. It was given out to friends of Harcourt Brace Yovanovitch, friends of the author, in commemoration of the publication of Birds of America. This is a very small selection, just an excerpt from Birds of America. And this is just Winter Visitors is what they decided to call it, but it was never a commercial item. And then we have, oh no, goodness gracious. All right, here we have somebody you wouldn't expect to find in this library. I am confessedly not a fan of this author and his bloviating. But I liked this book. I don't know if I liked it enough to stay in here. But this is The Art of the Publisher by Roberto Colasso, who has made an entire career out of just gaseously wandering on about subjects on the printed page to an absolutely embarrassing length. So as you look at a page-long paragraph and you'll say, okay, what does that mean? And not in the deeper capital M italicized sense of mean, but what does that even mean just line by line, word by word? What does that mean? Or is that just what our contemporary society refers to as word salad? Roberto Colasso is one of the masters of word salad, which is just a jumble of stuff on the page. Jordan Peterson, what's his name? Deepak Chopra. These people, authors who just vomit up this word salad of semi-profundities and what Daniel Dennett refers to as deepities, and then just string them together. It's incredibly, damningly easy to do that once you are really familiar with a language. And this didn't strike me that way, so I kept it, although I don't know why I'm keeping it in here. Okay, all right, this one is, next one doesn't belong here either. It does belong in this room, but it doesn't belong in this section. This is by Jeffrey O'Brien. This is Browser's Ecstasy. It's a long essay of his on reading. Very, very good. I've enjoyed I've enjoyed large parts of it. I haven't gone back to it in a while. It's a tiny little thing. That's the temptation of this library tour, is to make me go back to things, which is not good, especially not at the end of the year when I'm racing against the clock. What is this next one? Oh, okay. This is by Paulina Coney Drown. This is called simply Mrs. Bell. It's a tiny little book. It's an old thing. 1931, about a woman who was never famous, a woman who except in Boston, a woman who never achieved anything that we would consider to be renown, never wrote a book that you'd ever have heard of. This is a book about Mrs. Bell. She was a character, that most elusive of urban things. She was a character. She lived on Beacon Hill. She was daily at the Boston Athenaeum, a very old private library here in Boston. And she was electrifying. She was this odd, quirky little woman, this opinionated little old lady. But if you invited her to a party of yours for the literary set with Henry James in the offing, anywhere on Beacon Hill, you had to invite Mrs. Bell, not because she could backbite or because she was a reputation killer or anything, but because you knew you would enjoy her company. You knew there'd be at least one person there who would make the time worthwhile instead of being boring. And this is basically a collection of those kinds of moments, of those Mrs. Bell moments. There are hundreds more of them, scattered throughout other people's memoirs or just lost to history completely. A much bigger book about Mrs. Bell could be written, but I'm happy to have this one. Okay, this next one is this gorgeous Barnes & Noble faux leather edition of James Blish, the novelist James Blish, pure hack, D-list science fiction writer, no matter what anyone says about his novel A Case for Conscience, was given the enviable brief to write up the scripts of the original Star Trek. And he did precious little more than that. He really wasn't allowed to do more than that. He got more ambitious with those write-ups the longer along he went. They appeared in books called Star Trek 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12. And when you get up into around 10, 11, and 12, you can see that Blish has become so comfortable, and these books were bestsellers. No one expected that. He had enough comfort and clout so that he could start to elaborate on those scripts a little. Very little. and often he only had to work with what he was given, and some of those original scripts are just hilariously awful. So he wrote those, and they became books. And Star Trek 1 appeared originally with a photo still from the TV show on the cover, and sold. And no one was expecting that. Even the people at Paramount who thought, okay, well, pocketbooks, we sense that there is a small audience for this thing out there. You should print this, and then we'll see what happens. And it sold out. And little stores all across the country who had the old paperback books on little metal spinner racks would get these things. The box would the proprietor would no sooner open the box of that week's book shipments than all of his copies of the latest Star Trek book would be gone. Just completely sold, with people coming in, people of all ages, young people, old people, coming in and saying, can you order more? Not will you get later volumes, but can you order more of Star Trek 3? I didn't get here in time, and there's no other bookstore nearby. Word of that started to filter back to the studio and to the publishing arm. And these things just kept coming. And then they did the same thing. Alan Dean Foster took over and did the same thing for the scripts of the animated series. And Barnes & Noble, bless their heart, just a few years ago, had the inspired idea to take some of the best of those James Blish adaptations and turn them into one of their Barnes & Noble classics. They made this lovely thing. The classic episodes. Look at this. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? My only quibble, aside from the choices, some of the choices I didn't like, but was this. Of course you want the big three, but you really can't fit Uhura. If you're gonna split this, you really can't have 7 people. You really can't do that. You can't have the Enterprise 7. Instead, you have to have, if you're gonna add one extra person, it has to be Sulu. Or if you're going to do that on the back, I mean, here you have a great shot of the original Enterprise, NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D. But the Enterprise is already on the back. You couldn't have more of our cast? Maybe If you've got 4 on the front, maybe the other 3 and maybe Harcourt Fenton Mud or a Tribble. But anyway, that's a small quibble. It was wonderful to see this. I hope that Barnes & Noble does another volume. I would love it, absolutely love it, and I bet Alan Dean Foster would too, if they would do a volume of his scripts, because his books got more and more complex as they went along, even though they started out better. They started out better. Alan Dean Foster, in his sleep, was a better writer than James Blish, but I think it's fantastic, and I have often, I don't really make the argument anymore, because I have no idea what the state of Star Trek fandom is anymore. I think traditional fans like me have just sort of wandered off into the wilderness and don't expect to be welcomed back. Traditional fans like me flooded the network, the producers. We absolutely flooded the producers with ardent requests, please, over and over again, for the new Star Trek STD, Star Trek Discovery. The new Star Trek briefly featured Captain Pike and the crew of the Enterprise. Captain Pike, number 1, callow young Lieutenant Commander Spock, and a whole bunch of other characters that are only hinted at in a couple of times in the original show and in Yesteryear, an episode of the animated series. The network was flooded with pleas, heartfelt pleas from fans saying, could you give us that? We're not all that fond of Star Trek Discovery. We don't really care about Michael Burnham and her desire to rule the universe with wokeness. We're not really interested in any of that. It was a good faith try on your part, but we're not interested in it. It doesn't interest us in any way. However, you have had as a guest star an idea, a concept, and an entire ensemble already created that does interest us. Could you please make a show about that? And we will flock back to this franchise. We will give you ratings the like of which you cannot imagine. We will propel you to make this a movie, or many movies. And the studio ignored it because it's a ship commanded by a white guy. And the main female character doesn't even have a name. She just has a number. Please. How unwoke is that? So we're just going to keep getting more and more Star Trek Discovery crammed down our throats, no matter how... Fans of Star Trek Discovery aren't Star Trek fans of the old kind. Most people that I know who love Star Trek in this incarnation don't even know what to make about the new show, and certainly aren't all that interested in it. They definitely miss it. You can definitely miss it from week to week, which certainly wasn't true of even the weakest Star Trek franchise before J.J. Abrams got his hand on the whole thing. So I used to say that a surefire publishing thing to do now would be to go to science fiction authors or up-and-coming science fiction wannabe authors, go to them and say, okay, in honor of Star Trek, I would have hoped for an anniversary, but that didn't happen. Nothing happened for the anniversary. In honor of Star Trek, what we're going to do is we're going to do this all over again. We're going to do James Blish 2.0. So we've honored him. He did Star Trek 1 through 12. We are now going to commission a novel for every episode, a novelization of every episode, with as much Trek lore as you can pull in, for the time, for the place, enormous amounts of stuff. And you're going to start at the beginning. You're going to start at the beginning and move on. No one author will do more than one book unless they're a hit, unless fans write in and flood us and say, we want this author back to write something else. Fine. I think that idea would still work, and I think original Star Trek fans would buy it, but what do I know? So, oh no, all right, this next one is a big work of history, and it really doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong in this room. I love it, of course. It's Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror. Her History of the 14th Century. Just terrific. Just a terrific book. Terrific, sustained work of narrative history. What it's doing in here, I don't really know. But I can't re-examine all these things. That's also why you might be wondering. You're not wondering. You don't care at all. But that's also why these you've been getting these odd camera angles for the last few videos of mine, because I've got the tripod clinging to the bookshelf, perfectly stable. Nothing like it would have been possible with my old setup. You don't even want to know what my old setup was. It involved a rubber band. I could put this tripod in any position. I could hang it upside down. It would still work. It's incredible. So that I'm hoping will give me more opportunities for filming in other locations, but we shall see. So this next one is along the lines of something that we've seen before. You have seen before my love of British country houses. And this is England's Best 1,000 Houses. by Simon Jenkins, who did another. It's a gorgeous volume. He did another one just like it for churches. So you get not only the exteriors and the interiors, but also maps to tell you exactly where you are, exactly where everything is. And I just have a pure voyeuristic love of this sort of thing. I don't think it's ever been done any better than this book. I lose time in this book, although I lose less time than I would ordinarily do if it's got cocking going on all around it. Cocking is not only bad for the books, it's bad for browsing, because you look at a bookcase that's covered in cocking and you think, oh, that's too much trouble. It's more trouble than it's worth, so you don't do it, and that's not good. Every book should. Okay. Well, who is this? This is Scribner's. Okay. This is arguably one of the worst books ever written. I love it. I have a soft spot for it. And this is a heavily illustrated version. Okay. This is Edward Bulwer-Lytton. There is actually a prize now, the Bulwer-Lytton Prize, for bad writing. That's how synonymous his name has become with wretched, overheated purple prose. And this is no exception. This is his most famous book, The Last Days of Pompeii. And this is illustrated by F.C. Yohn, Y-O-H-N. The Scribner is famous for a whole run of books that were illustrated by N.C. Wyeth. This is not one of those, but still, I had to have it. Okay. All right, this next one should have a pub sheet in it. Yes, it does. This is from 2015, so before we knew each other. It was a head-scratcher of a book for 2015. One of the most confusing books I read that year. I wonder if I'd be equally confused by it now. I probably would be. It's by Jane Ward, and the title is Not Gay. And the subtitle is Sex Between Straight White Men. And that's what the book is about. This is a nonfiction book about men sleeping with men without ever identifying as gay or bisexual. Without ever identifying even as sexually curious or calling themselves that. Sexually fluid, sexually curious, none of that. The men who are interviewed in this book are straight. In their own estimation, they are straight. They are sexually attracted to women. Period. And yet they are canoodling with each other on every other page. It's a very strange book. Very strange. I really ought to reread it. Now that we're going on 5 years since I read it. I really should read it again. Especially since, look at how much has changed in that 5 years. In society's discussion of sexuality. Look at how much has changed. That the author couldn't have known that. I don't know. I haven't checked to see if Jane Ward has written anything else. A follow-up, maybe. Still not gay. I haven't checked to see if there's a follow-up, but I should read it again. Okay, this next one is odd. This is odd that this would be here. This is BobbsMerrill, the company BobbsMerrill. Once upon a time, they did a whole set of these. You've probably seen them in your used bookstores. Just these bland yellow trade paperbacks. And this one is how strange. This one is The Complete Poetry of Catullus, translated by Roy Arthur Swanson. This is the complete poems of Catullus, just sort of sitting here. It's not bilingual. It's just this, and it's not multiple translators, multiple poets. It's just this one poet. So I'm really wondering why I kept this at all, much less why I kept it in this room. I'll set it aside. just to interrogate it and see if maybe I can figure out a reason. I'm not to say there's anything wrong with Swanson's translation. It's probably good. It's not memorable. I can't off the top of my head remember what kind of a job he does. But I have actual Catullus in this room. I have Catullus as we have him in authorized, in the best scholarly editions of his own surviving manuscript. So I can understand why I probably do have a Penguin Classic or two of Catullus. I think I have Catullus in English, for instance. But I don't know why I would have one poet. Well, anyway, I'll figure it out. And then we get to this last one. Oh, the last one. Okay, the last one we just referred to it. This is Scribner again. This is their classics. They did a whole line of illustrated classics. I wish I had them all. At times, I have had them all. Maybe not Michael Strogoff, but all the rest of them I would gladly have. This is The Last of the Mohicans, illustrated by N.C. Wyeth. And if I can, I will find an illustration. They are those of you who hate deckled edges in books are going to crow in triumph here, because this has deckled edges, and one of the problems with deckled edges is that you can't find things immediately. There we go. Look at that. There's someone being abducted. Look at that. I love Fenimore Cooper. Absolutely love him. The Last of the Mohicans is not my favorite, even of his Natty Bumppo books. I think The Prairie is probably my favorite. Don't have it. I don't even know if Scribner makes an illustrated version of The Prairie. I know they make one for the Deerslayer, I think. But I should check on that, because they're probably cheap online. And I know that I want them, and I know that I want them for this room, which is a very different thing. So there you go. That is the next shelf in this bookshelf tour. And it was a bit of a mess, right? There are probably half a dozen books out of these 24 where I cannot identify for you immediately why they are here. And that's bad. It's on one level, it's very bad, because they should have been weeded out a long time ago. Space is at a premium in this little room. And on the other hand, it's really good. It's really good that we're doing this, because it gives me a chance to go at these things and interrogate why they're here. Even that book, Not Gay, fascinating as it is, I don't quite know why it's here. Anyway, I'll ask all those questions in due time. But for now, we'll wrap this up, and we're just going to keep moving on. We'll just do the next shelf tomorrow. So I will wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.